Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are here as promised with the second half of the testimony that took place with Jane Doe number 5, who we already know as Ariel Clary, and this is testimony from Monday, August 23rd. And for those of you that have been following the saga about the transcripts, I will say to you that allegedly transcripts are on hold until further notice. If I hear anything different or if I'm able to purchase other transcripts, we will look into it at that time. But as it stands now, I am being told that transcripts are on hold. Then something else I want to bring up, the guy with Inner City Press, Matthew Russell, he made a post on Twitter where he was stating that Jane Doe number 11, who I haven't been able to figure out who she is. If you remember, I posted the list on my community page, guessing who I thought each person was. Well, at this point, I don't know who Jane Doe 11 is. According to the clues that were given in the indictment, she was 21 years old. She contracted herpes, she filed a lawsuit, and whatever her situation is, it took place in 2001. And I couldn't find anybody who matched all of that criteria and other things that were in the indictment for that person. But according to Matthew Russell with Inner City Press, I guess what is the man named Charles Scholar, the latest attorney that joined the defense? Well, he has filed a couple of motions. They're all under seal. That's why I haven't brought them to you. But somehow Matthew has figured out that these motions are regarding Jane Doe number 11. And so now the prosecution, if I'm understanding this correctly, the prosecution is now trying to limit what the defense can ask this person when they take the stand. And so I guess that's going back and forth. He didn't really go into the specifics, of course, because it is a sealed document, but somehow he's hearing this information and he is relaying it to the public that they are going to try to preclude avenues of cross-examination of Jane Doe number 11. And then people were saying that Precedence, which is the documentary by Shabazz, that was going to be entered into evidence. Not sure how accurate that is, because Shabazz has stated on his Instagram that no one has reached out to him about using the documentary. And he said that there was an investigator trying to get in touch with him, but he didn't know who the investigator represented, if he was for the defense or for the prosecution. I'm thinking it must be somebody for the defense, because if it was with the prosecution, and there wouldn't be an investigator, it would be the FBI showing up to ask him questions. And so one thing I know about this case is that a lot of weird stuff has been happening, and I wouldn't put it past them to use the documentary without first talking to him. But normally in trials, if you want to use stuff like this, you first want to talk to the person who created whatever it is. You bring those people in so that they can explain to the jury, what was going on in the documentary, give their credentials, because basically Precedence could be just a whole bunch of lies that some Joe Schmo off the side of the road put together that has really no validity. It could have all been fiction. So you would want to bring the creator on to, validate him and, authenticate him as a filmmaker, that this is a real documentary and this is what he hoped to accomplish. But according to him, no one has reached out to him. So I am not sure, if it is true that the documentary is going to be used in the case. And then also, if it was going to be used against Ariel to try and impeach Ariel, seemed like it would have been presented before she left the witness stand. So she has left the witness stand, and there have been a couple of more witnesses that have gotten up and testified in this case. So I can only think that it's the defense that wants to introduce it, and maybe they will introduce it during the defense portion of the case, and then it may be their investigator that's trying to get in touch with Shabazz. But Shabazz, from my opinion, doesn't seem to be much interested in participating in this case. So he may be ducking and dodging the investigator so that he doesn't have to appear in court. But we will have to wait and see how that goes. And I believe that was the only updates. There was no court today, Friday. And for the most part, they are not going to have court on Fridays. They may have it next Friday because that's leading up to the holiday. Labor Day is that Monday. And then Nicole has requested that she be able to observe what did I tell you all that day was? Rosh Hashanah. She wants to observe that. It's a Jewish holiday. And so there will be no court on the 7th or the 8th. So no court 6th, 7th, and 8th. And they should resume on that following Thursday. So let's go ahead and get into this. Is the court that is returning from their lunch break on Monday, August 23rd. And we will pick up where they left off. It means that the judge is entering the courtroom. And so Judge Donnelly says that, everybody can have a seat. Then the defendant enters the courtroom, who we know is Robert Kelly. The court, or when I say the court, I'm referring to Donnelly, is speaking. And she says, "Are we ready for this witness?" "Oh, I know we were going to." Then she pauses and she says, "Did you all figure out what it is?" And then Elizabeth Geddes, who is the prosecutor who is interviewing this current witness, states, "We haven't, but let me just tell the defendant." And then Donnelly says, "Okay." And then there's a notation that the discussion was had off the record. And then Donnelly continues and says, "Okay, so we've resolved whatever." There's a pause. It wasn't even a dispute. You're both on the same page about how the witness is going to describe this. And when they broke for lunch, they were talking about how Ariel, who is the witness they're talking to, is going to introduce that she had knowledge of his 2008 court case, which he was acquitted of. And so Geddes says, "I think so. I just want to ask counsel one more thing." Then there's a discussion that was off the record. Donnelly comes back in and says, "I'm assuming you've worked this out." Koenig says, "We're fine." Donnelly, "All right. If you need me, let me know." "All right, let's get the witness and then let's get the jury." So then Geddes says, "Oh, Your Honor, we may use a board on that easel if that's okay with the court." Donnelly says, "I don't." Then she pauses and says, "Well, not my problem, I guess, but I don't understand how you're going to use it. Who can see it?" Because remember, the way the courtroom is set up, the jury is not in the jury's box. They're actually sitting out where spectators would have been. And then instead of the defense table being on one side of the courtroom and then the prosecution tables on the other side, and these two tables being, like having their back to what would have been the spectators in the court, they have the tables in the middle of the courtroom and they're actually facing each other. And then there's a podium where whoever is talking at that time is speaking to the person that's in the witness stand. So a different setup. And if you're watching the images on the video that's scrolling by, there are images of how the court is set up in those, and you can see what I'm talking about. So then Geddes responds, we're hoping the jury. Then Donnelly jumps in and says, but it's facing here. Oh, okay, let's get the jury. So the jury enters the courtroom, and then Geddes says, Your Honor, can we approach for just one small matter? Donnelly said, with the court reporter. Geddes says, yes, please. And then the courtroom deputy says, all rise. Jury enters the courtroom. Courtroom deputy, you may be seated. And then there's a sidebar conference that's going on. And the following occurred at sidebar. Elizabeth Geddes, Your Honor, I just received an email conveyed by our officers that the court reporter, or court sketch, not court sketchers, sketch artist, wanted to know if she should be blurring the faces of the individuals who are testifying under pseudonyms. We would support that. We would support that they be blurred just to further protect their identities, although I'll be candid those. Then Canick cut her off, and he said, you can't tell from the sketches anyway. And then Geddes says, I don't disagree with you anyhow. Then Canick jumps in again and says, sketching looks like Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse. Then Donnelly said, you realize that sometimes these transcripts get released. I'm not going to weigh in on that. First of all, I don't think that, at least it's my hope, that nobody can tell who you are from those sketches. So I think that's not that big a deal. And then Geddes replied, thank you, Judge. And then that was the end of the sidebar conference. And then they go ahead and the jury is present. The witness resumes the stand and they're ready to get going. Donnelly says, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you had a good lunch. We're ready to resume with the direct examination of the witness. And then she tells them to go ahead. The courtroom deputy, the witness is reminded that she's still under oath, and direct examination continues. And then, as I did in the first video, I'm going to start off with Elizabeth Geddes, who is the prosecutor, asking the question, and then you'll know she's speaking because there is a question being asked. And then when Ariel responds, then you get a statement that's coming out. And if Ariel asks a question, then I'll let you know that it is Ariel that's asking the question. So it says, when you first started living with the defendant after you moved back to Chicago in 2015, who, if anyone, from high school did you stay in touch with? I stayed in touch with Malik and a friend of mine named, and she says a friend of mine named Maya, but I think she meant mine. And then when I say Malik, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong. It is a female, and she's spelling her name Malak. So then Geddes says, how did you stay in touch with them? Via text message and through Snapchat. Then Judge Donnelly says, I want to ask you to keep your voice up a little bit. Then Canick replied, Your Honor, can I have that answer read back? Donnelly says, sure, whereupon the record was read. Then Geddes picks back up and she says, now, do you remember what, if anything, the defendant did on October 2nd of 2015? No. I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 205A. I'm showing the witness what's marked for identification as Government Exhibit 205A. Do you recognize what's shown in 205A? Yes, I do. Does that refresh your recollection as to what happened on October 2nd of 2015? Yes. What happened that day? I had expressed to a friend of mine that he had nutted. Then she paused and said, ejaculated inside of me. And when you say he, who are you referring to? The defendant. And you, did you tell your friend this because this, in fact, had happened on that day? Yes, it did. And when? Do you recall where you were in early October of 2015? I do not know. What, if anything, do you recall happening on October 4th, 2 days later of that same year? I do not recall. I'm showing the witness only what's marked for identification as Government Exhibit 205D. And actually, may I approach your honor? And then Donnelly says yes. The counsel approaches the witness. And then Donnelly says, all right, I thought you wanted a sidebar. And then Geddes says, oh no. And then she asks her question, does looking at 205D refresh your recollection as to what, if anything, happened on October 5th of 2015 or October 4th of 2015? And she replies, yes. What happened? I had a conversation between a friend, and it was describing how an abortion, the procedure for an abortion. Why were you having that conversation with your friend? Because he had ejaculated inside of me. And what, if anything, were you concerned about? Pregnancy, because we had not used protection ever. Do you recall having a conversation with the defendant about what he would do if you were in fact pregnant? I do. How did the defendant react? He did in fact say that he would want me to get an abortion because he wanted me to keep my body tight. Now please tell me, if she's been having unprotected sex with him since she met him in April, why isn't she on birth control if she's concerned about getting pregnant? But I digress. Let's go back to Elizabeth Geddes. And how, if at all, then she pauses, how, if at all, did the defendant say your age was a factor in that decision? My age was a factor. What did he say? He said that if I was any other age, it wouldn't make a difference. And how old were you then? I was 17. How did you feel when you believed that you might be pregnant and might have to get an abortion? I was scared. And then Geddes says the government offers 205A and 205D. Donnelly says any objection. Canick says no, Your Honor. Donnelly says okay, and then they enter those two items into evidence. And then Geddes continues, and just to be clear, do you recall who you were talking about with? And then she says it was either Maya or Malik. And then Geddes says, may I publish 205A? Donnelly says yes, jury only. And then Geddes, jury only, please. Which means that they're showing the jury something that the people that are in the overflow rooms cannot see. And there is several blurbs here. Who wrote what's reflected there? And then Ariel says, I wrote those messages. And what is the date on which these were sent? October 3rd, 2015. And can you read what's written here, where my pen is pointed? I said, you know, he nutted in me before his show today. And again, you're referring to the defendant. Yes, I was. And what did you mean by the term nutted? He had ejaculated inside of me. And how about what did you mean by his show before his performance? And again, for the jury only, may I publish 205D? Donnelly says yes. And then Geddes says, where I'm putting my pen, well, let me start with, on the first page, who sent those text messages? I sent those text messages. And on what date? October 5th, 2015. And where my pen is, what does it say? It says, I'm going to kill myself. And what did you send after that? The procedure for how an abortion is done. Were those photographs of that? Yes, it was. And I'm now turning to the fourth page of 205D. Can you, again, who wrote these? Who sent these text messages on this page? Page 4 of 205D. I did. Can you read what you wrote where my pen is pointed? Yes, I said I can't go through with this. What were you referring to? An abortion. And now where my pen is pointed, can you read that? He nutted in me today. And now, just for the record, who are you referring to by he in that sentence? The defendant. And how about here? Can you read that where my pen is pointed? But he said we need to look into that abortion stuff because he wants to keep my body right and tight. And I'm now turning to the 8th page of 205D. Can you read where my pen is pointed? Now, if I was 18 and below that, he wouldn't care about the baby, speaking that I'm 17. What did you mean by that? He had expressed to me that it been any other age that he would have wanted to start a family. And again, just for the record, who wrote those text messages shown on page 8? I sent these messages. And I'm showing you page 6 of that. There are some text messages in gray and some in blue. What does the gray indicate regarding who sent those? Me. And what about the blue? That is whom I was speaking to. And I want to direct your attention on page 5. Do you see where my pen is pointed? Yes. What does that say? It says, tell Maya. Does that refresh your recollection as to who you were talking to in this text message? Yes. Who was it? Malik. And how do you know that? Because I told her to tell Maya. And one line up there it is says, like FR. What did you mean by that? Like for real. FR stands for real? Yes. And above there you also reference a Plan B pill. What did you mean by Plan B pill? That is a pill that you take immediately after someone has ejaculated inside of you. Now, did you ultimately learn whether or not you were pregnant in October of 2015? I was not. You testified earlier about the defendant wanting you to limit communications about him and you with your friends. Do you recall that testimony? Yes, I do. Why were you able to communicate with your friend about what was going on between you and the defendant in those text messages? I would delete the text messages out of my phone, and I had told both of them never to text me unless I was to text them first. And why did you do that? Because I knew that the defendant was very controlling about who I spoke to and what I spoke about. Were there certain times when the defendant spent more time away from you? Yes. Where would that occur? It would just depend on the city that we were in and his schedule. And were there any cities that you recall where the defendant was less likely to be around you and more likely to be somewhere else? Not necessarily, no, if I was with him. Okay, in those text messages where you reference Plan B, what did you understand the purpose of a Plan B pill to be? It would kill whatever possibility of life. And was the purpose so that you wouldn't continue to be pregnant? Yes. Now in those text messages, do you recall your testimony earlier today about those trips to California? I do. And while you were 17, did you take additional trips to California with the defendant? Yes, I did. And do you remember where you traveled to? I do not. Do you remember what the purpose of your travel was for? He had shows. And while you were traveling in California to see the defendant or to accompany the defendant while he performed at his shows, do you recall whether or not any of your sexual contact with the defendant was recorded? Yes, it was. What was it recorded with? An iPad that was in his possession at all times. And that was when you were 17. Yes. What, if anything, do you recall sending your friends on October 19th of 2015? I don't recall. I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 205F. Do you recognize what's shown in 205F? I do. Does that refresh your recollection as to what, if anything, you sent to your friends on October 19th of 2015? I do, yes. What did you send your friends? I sent them pictures of me and the defendant. Why did you do that? Because I just needed someone else to have proof just in case anything happened. And you say you were concerned in case something happened. Do you remember what type of phone you had back then? At this time, I had an iPhone that the defendant had paid for. Do you remember when you got the iPhone? When I left to be homeschooled earlier that year. And what, if anything, did the defendant say about that iPhone? Now let's stick a pin here. These text messages occurred on October 15. She left to be homeschooled in August. So why is she saying earlier in the year? Okay, back to it. So this is Geddes. And what, if anything, did the defendant say about that iPhone? He made me put a passcode on it, but he was to know the passcode at all times. Do you still have that iPhone? I do not. Why not? The defendant broke it. And I want to direct, the government offers 205F. Donnelly. Any objection? Canick, may I see it? Pause in the proceedings. Canic, no objection. Donnelly, okay. Government Exhibit 205F was received in evidence. Geddes, may I publish? Donnelly, yes. Exhibit is published. Whose writing is in gray? Me. And right here where my pen is, what did you write? I said, keep these. What are you referring to? The photographs that I sent. Now, where my pen is pointed, that first photograph on 205F, what is that? That is the defendant. Who took that picture? I took that picture. Where did you take it? He was actually shooting the cover art for his Buffet Tour album cover art. And the Buffet Tour was the one that you were on when you returned to live with the defendant after you started homeschooling. Is that right? Yes. And turning to page 2, where my pen is pointing, what is that a photograph of? That is a photograph that the defendant took of me and him. Do you recall where you were? Yes, we were in the fitting room at the studio that he was shooting his album cover. And I'm sorry, what was the room that you were in? It was a fitting room where you would change. And is that you on the right? Yes, it is. How old are you? I was 17 years old. And how about where my pen is pointing here and here? Who are in those photos? That is me and the defendant. Was that taken in the same location? Yes, it was. And how about this one? Where my pen is pointed? Yes, that is me and the defendant. Same place? Yes. And finally, I'm going to turn to the last page where my pen is pointed. Who is that a photograph of? Me and the defendant. Do you remember where that was taken? It was the same day. He appears to be in different clothing. How's that? Oh no, he had changed his outfit. And was that as part of the shoot that was going on? Yeah, he had multiple looks. Now, do you recall where you were on November 14th of 2015 and where you were going? I do not. The government, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as 205I. Can you take a look at that and let us know if that refreshes your recollection as to where you had been and where you are going? Yes. Where had you been? I had been to LA and Vegas. Do you recall why you were in Los Angeles and Las Vegas? Yes, he had shows. And where were you going? Back to Chicago. And can you take another look at that? Yeah, we were in Chicago, sorry. Where were you going? To New York. When were you scheduled to leave for New York? The next day. And what is the date of these? November 14, 2015. The government offers 205I. So then Canic, no objection. Donnelly, okay, those are in evidence. Government Exhibit 205 was received in evidence. And then Geddes continues. By the way, did you wear glasses back then? I did. What types of glasses? Can you describe the glasses that you wore? I had a few large frames and I had a few small rectangular size frames. Examination continues. Geddes asks the question, was the defendant aware of your friend Malik, who you exchanged those text messages with? Canic, objection. Then Ariel answered anyway and said he was. And then Donnelly said, are you objecting? Canic said yes. And then Donnelly said, oh, can you do it so I can hear you? Thanks. The objection is overruled. This help him. So was the defendant aware of your friend Malik? He was. What, if anything, did you tell him about your friend Malik? I had told him that she was my cousin. Why did you tell the defendant, was Malik your cousin? She is not. Why did you tell the defendant that she was your cousin? I felt that if I told him that she was a family member, that he would allow me to stay in communication with her. And I am showing you what's been marked for identification as 205J. Do you recognize what's shown in 205J? Yes, I do. What is that? It's a video from my best friend, Maya. And how did you react when you received that video? I was anxious. How had you received the video? Through text message. And what about receiving the video made you anxious? Because the defendant had the passwords to my phone and he would check my phone and he didn't really allow me to talk to them. And what, if anything, how did you respond to your friend after you received that video? I told her that she couldn't do that. And why did you tell your friend that she couldn't do that? Because he checks my phone. So then Geddes, the government offers 205J, Canick, no objection, Dunley, okay, and then it is entered into evidence. Geddes, can we publish this, please? Dunley, go ahead for the jury only. Geddes, yes, jury only, please. And so the exhibit was published to the jury only. Geddes, I want to direct your attention to this, indicating where my pen is pointed. What is shown there? It's a video of my friend Mia, and where my pen is now pointed, what is there? It is a text message from me. And what did you say in your text message? Can you read it? You know y'all can't do that because he checked my phone. And when you saw y'all can't do that, who were you referring to? Who was the you in that? Malik and Mia. Or it might be Maya. I think it's Mia though. I'm sorry. And were those your friends from high school? Yes. And when you said he checked my phone, who was the he in that sentence? The defendant. And turning to the second page, can you read this blue entry indicating where my pen is pointed? What he gonna say if he see the video? And how did you respond right below? He's gonna be like, why is that your BF when you said you be texting your cousin? Who did you mean by BF there? What did you mean by BF? Best friend. And what were you saying in this particular text message? Meaning that he only allowed me to talk to Malik because I had told her that she was family. However, Mia, he did not want me communicating with her. And can you read? And then Geddes says, I turn the page to page 3. Can you read the response on page 3? I just don't want to have to block your number because he think I'm being immature. That's why I deleted apps and everyone's number, because I got to show some age now that I'm with a 48-year-old. So doing so has made me grow out of a lot of young habits. Just don't want to ruin the one shot I have at being able to talk to you. And when you referred to a 48-year-old, who were you referring to? The defendant. And finally, I am showing you what's being marked for identification as 205M. Do you recognize what's shown in 205M? Yes, I do. And I am going to turn the page to page 2. Can you take a look at that for a moment? Yes, I do. Generally speaking, what is shown in this particular exhibit? Basically, me texting and saying that certain things that they can't do because it would get me caught. And what is it that you didn't want your friends to do? They couldn't text me or reach out to me like without me doing so first. And when you said it would get you caught up, what did you mean by that? Meaning, like I would get into then she pauses and then she says, I would cause an altercation between me and the defendant. And turning to page 1, can you tell what the dates of these communications were? January 8th, 2016. And then Geddes, the government offers 205M. Donnelly, any objection? Canick, no. Donnelly, all right, that comes into evidence. Government's exhibit 205M was received in evidence. And then Geddes continues and says, I'm turning to page 2. Donnelly, is this just for the jury? Geddes, yes, just for the jury. Donnelly, make sure you let me know. Geddes, I'm sorry, yes. And the exhibit was published to the jury only. So then Geddes continues and says, can you read what you wrote? Is the gray text messages that you sent? Yes. Can you read what you wrote there? Texting you will get me caught up. And where my text message, where my pen is pointing now, indicating what does that say? So Geddes done slipped up and said that them her text messages, that she wrote them text messages. Okay. So Azriel replied, "You got to learn how to use code, baby girl." That's what baby G is? Yes. And what did you mean by that? Meaning that there was a specific way that she would be able to talk to me, and if it wasn't like everyday stuff, then she shouldn't or she couldn't text me. And by everyday stuff, what are you referring to? Like if it wasn't just her saying, how are you, or how are your nails, or how is your hair, if it wasn't what he would call it, innocent stuff, then I wasn't able to talk to them about anything personal. And who are you referring to when you said he, the defendant? You testified earlier that had and then she paused and said you were connected because if the defendant had learned about these text communications, there would be an altercation. What did you mean by that? In 2015, the defendant had introduced me into what he called chastising. And what are chastising, or what do you mean by chastising? Spankings. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, in the beginning of the time that you spent with the defendant, what, if anything, did the defendant tell you about other females in his life? The defendant did tell me that he had multiple women and girlfriends. How did you react to that? I was okay with that. What, if anything, did you eventually learn about his relationships with those other females? I had learned that they were actually all living together. How did you learn? I had learned from the defendant. In what way? When we were in Atlanta and anything that we would be, when we were in Atlanta and anywhere that we would be, then she pauses, at the studio and in Atlanta, he had a guest house in which they all lived there. And by they, who are you generally referring to? Are you referring to the other females that you just mentioned? Yes. Do you recall when you learned that the defendant was living with other females? I do, yes. When was it? It was in Atlanta. And approximately how long had you been spending time with the defendant at the time that you learned that he was living with other females? It was in 2015. Do you remember how long it was, though, that you had been with the defendant? Probably about 4 or 5 months. And how old were you there? I was 17. And by then, were you still having sexual contact with the defendant? I was, yes. Without using any full names, who did you learn was living with the defendant at that time? Neek, Juice, Joy, and V. Now hold up now. I thought when he had the house in Atlanta that's where Ashante said she was staying there too. She don't mention Ashante here. So anyway, Geddes, I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 69B. Do you recognize 69B? Yes, I do. What is 69B? This is Neek. The government offers 69B. Canic, no objection. Donnelly, okay, that's in evidence. So then Geddes says, may I publish? Donnelly says, to the jury only. Then Geddes says, no, you can publish. Exhibit published. On Geddes, and I am showing the witness only what's now been marked for identification as 69C. And before I do you know Nick's first name and last name? I do. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 69C. On top, is that the same photograph that was just shown in 69B? It is, yes. And below there is a name. Is that the name that you know to be the first and last name of Nick? It is, yes. The government offers 69C and would ask that the court publish it to the jury only. Canic, no objection. Donnelly, okay. And then Exhibit 69C is entered. And it's published for the jury only. Okay, then Geddes continues, I am showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 52B, as in boy. Do you recognize what's shown in 52B? I do. Who is that? That's Juice. And then they go through the whole thing where, she wants to enter it into the record and there's no objection. Then we go down to 52C. And then she verifies and asks the name that's written on there, as for Juice. And of course, they're not telling saying on the microphone who these people are, but the jury can see it when they post the exhibit to them. And so then she goes on and says, and below that, is that the first and last name that you know of Juice, who is known in 52B and C? It is. And so then that's entered with no objection. Then she asks her, do you recognize 72? She says, I do. Who is 72? She says that that's V. Then they go through the process of entering that into evidence. They move on to Exhibit 78. We learn that that is Joy. And they enter it into the record, show it to the jury. And let's see. Then she says, and do you know Joy's first and last name? She says, I do. Then she says, I am showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 78A. And where my pen is indicating, is that the same photograph that was just shown in Government Exhibit 78? It is. And below that, is that the first and last name of Joy? Yes. And so then they go through the process of entering it and publishing it only to the jury. Then she says, now you testified earlier that you found out that the defendant was living with multiple females about 4 to 5 months in. Yes. How old were you when that happened? I was 17. And so when you say 4 to 5 months, do you mean 4 to 5 months from when you started? Then she pauses and says, when you met the defendant. Then Cannon objected. And then Getty said, what did you mean by 4 to 5 months? Well, I had initially met all of them from time to time. However, I did not know they were his girlfriends that he was living with. When did you learn, though, that he was living with them in relation to when you first met the defendant? About 4 to 5 months after meeting him. Now, did you continue to spend time with the defendant after you learned that he was living with these other females? I did. What, if any, rules did the defendant set with respect to how you should interact with these other females? He told me to listen to whatever they said because it was basically coming from him. And how much, if any, information did you understand you should be sharing with these individuals, these women that he was living with? I could not share any of my personal information with them. And how did you know that? The defendant had told me not to. Now, through your testimony today, you've testified that certain rules that the defendant wanted you to follow. What, if anything, would happen if you did not follow one of those rules? I would be chastised. And what do you mean again by chastising? Meaning that he would spank me. Who used the word chastising? The defendant. Were there other things that might happen if you did not follow one of the defendant's rules? Yes, what? Sometimes, occasionally, I would be left in a room or my phone would be taken, or sometimes I would receive a punishment if it was a drastic rule that I had broken. I want to start with chastisement or spankings. Do you recall the first time that the defendant spanked you? I do. Where do you recall that happening? It was in Atlanta, Georgia. How old were you? I was 17. And what do you remember happening? I remember him saying that he has protocols and rules that need to be followed, and that a chastising was only to help me be better and remember the small things just in case I was not remembering the things to do. And did you know what the defendant meant when he used the word chastising? No, I did not. How did you learn? I asked him what it was. What did he say? He said that it was just a spanking to help me remember. And I think you testified that it was in Atlanta the first time that the defendant spanked you. Is that correct? Yes. Where in Atlanta were you? We were in a hotel. I believe the Hyatt. And what, if anything, do you remember about that particular hotel room? I remember that we were in a room and the number was 407, and I thought that it was so bizarre because my area code for my cell phone number was 407. So that was the number of the hotel room? Yes. Now, do you recall what prompted what rule, or do you recall what prompted the defendant to tell you about these chastisements and to spank you that day in room 407 in Atlanta. I had did something that he didn't like, and he said that it was time to teach me about the protocols and chastising. As you sit here today, do you know what it was that you did that the defendant did not like? I do not recall. Can you describe specifically what the defendant did when he spanked you? He did make me take off my underwear. I was wearing a dress, and he did spank me 3 times, open palm. And how were you positioned when he spanked you? I was facing the left, and I was standing up, and my butt was facing his left palm. How often did the defendant spank you during the time that you spent with him? I would get chastised nearly every 2 to 3 days. And when you say chastise, what are you referring to? Spankings. You testified that first time the defendant spanked you 3 times. Did the number of spankings change from a particular incident to another incident? Yes, they did. How, if at all? How would you know how many spankings the defendant was going to give you? He would always tell me beforehand and to prepare. What would he do? He would tell me how many spankings I would have to take, and he would just tell me to just be ready. Other than spankings, did the defendant ever physically hurt you? Yes, he did. Do you recall the first time that happened? The first time that happened was probably in Atlanta, Georgia. And let me back up one moment regarding your testimony about the spankings. You testified the first time that you had taken off your underwear. Is that correct? Yes. Were those spankings that happened subsequently by the defendant, did you always have your underwear off? Yes. Can you describe to the jury how hard the defendant would spank you? Yes, he would leave bruises, and sometimes like it would make my skin tear. How did it make you feel? Terrible. Did it hurt? It would, yes. Before I interrupted you, you were about to testify about the first time that you remembered the defendant physically hurting you, other than these spankings, and I think you testified that you were in Atlanta. Do you recall what started the particular incident? He had received a text message. Did you see the text message? He showed me, yes. Who did the defendant tell you the text message was from? He said that it was from a man by the name of Divine, and is Devyne. And did you see the text message itself? I did, yes. What was the text message? It was my name and a rat emoji. At the time, see, everybody calling her a rat. So even the inside people knew she was a rat. So it says, at the time that text message, or that you saw that text message, did you know who Divine was? I did not. What happened after the defendant received that text message? He had taken my phone and asked me who had I been talking to. And backing up one moment, you testified that this happened in Atlanta. Do you recall how old you were? I was 17. What, if anything, did the defendant say when he took your phone? He said that I had 30 seconds to be honest and to puke, and if I left out any small detail, that it would go up in that room. Now, when you said he told you that you had 30 seconds to be honest and to puke, what did you mean by that? Meaning like to tell him whom I had been talking to and to be completely honest with him. And when you said that you had 30 seconds to do that, or it would go up in that room, what do you mean by that? Meaning that there would be no chastising, meaning that it would really be a physical altercation. How did you respond? I was honest, but I did leave out details, and he did begin to physically hit me. What were you honest? What did you tell the defendant? I told him that I had been talking to Mia. And who is Mia again? Mia she was my best friend at the time. You said that you left out details. What do you recall leaving out? I told him I had left out that we had been intimate and that I had expressed that to Mia. I'm sorry, so what did you not tell the defendant? I did not tell him that we were being intimate. That who was being... Okay, sorry about that. Somebody had walked in the room. Where was I at? It says, okay, did you leave out the part The fact that you had told Mia that you and the defendant had been intimate? Yes, I did. How did the defendant respond? He began to hit me. What happened after that? He continuously began to hit me, and in between it, he would ask me, "Are you ready to be honest?" And I would say, "I don't know what you're talking about," and he would continue to hit me. How was he hitting you? He was hitting me with an open palm and with a closed palm. Where on your body was he hitting you? Canic. Objection to the leading. Donnelly, where was he hitting you is not leading. Canic. On your body is. Donnelly, well, it's not. Overruled. He hit me all over. He would hit me in my face and my arms, on my butt, all over my body. What happened? I continued to not be honest with him, and then he went in his closet and grabbed one of his Air Force One shoes. What, if anything, did he do with one of his shoes? He continued to hit me until I finally broke. What did he use to hit you then? An Air Force One, size 12. Do you remember where on your body he hit you? He hit me all over. With the shoe? Yes. How, if at all, did you react when the defendant was hitting you with his shoe? I was running from him in our master bedroom in Atlanta. I remember then she pauses, we were in the restroom and somehow we ended all the way in the master bedroom. And I was trying to run from him and fight back, but I'm literally no match. How tall are you? I'm 4'11". Do you remember how much you weighed back then in 2015? I was about 98 pounds. How tall is the defendant? He is 6 feet. How did that end? What happened? After that, I admitted to everything, and I did tell him that I had told Mia that we had been intimate, and he told me how we would fix it. And then he told Juice to come in the bedroom, and he told her to run your sister a bathwater. Now, child, ain't this from a movie? I think I done seen this in the movie where the man, wasn't it one of them Tyler Perry movies where Blair Underwood beat the girl up? Remember they were getting married and he got mad because they threw the bachelorette party or something, and then after he beat her, he ran the bath water from her and let her soak in the tub and all of that good stuff. Y'all remember that? Okay. Thought it was just me. So then he says, yes, where did that happen? It happened in our master bedroom. And when you say your master bedroom, what are you referring to? What residence? What house? At the big house. In Atlanta? Yes. Do you know where Juice was when the defendant was assaulting you? I do not know. Do you know where the defendant went when did Juice, in fact, run you a bath? Yes, she did. Do you know where the defendant went when Juice came and ran you a bath? No, I do not. Did you eventually meet an individual named Divine? Years later, yes. Do you remember approximately when you met him? I met him, I believe, in the year of 2020. Now, they weren't even together in 2020, so how she just not meeting him? Okay, so what, if anything, did Divine show you? Hold on a second. Divine had showed me that same text, which was the last text that he had sent to the defendant. So he done kept a whole text for several years. Okay. I thought text usually auto-delete after you reach 100 texts from the same person. At least that's how my phone be working. So anyway, Divine had showed me that same text, which was the last text that he had sent the defendant. And what was in the text? It was my name with a rat emoji. You testified that at times the defendant had you stay in a room. Is that right? Yes. Do you remember the first time that the defendant had you stay in a room? It was in 2015. What happened? It was in the previous evidence that you had showed where he said that I could not leave the room. Can you describe what location that was? I do not recall, but I do know that we were on the West Coast. Okay, do you remember what prompted him to tell you that you couldn't leave that room? No, I just He had expressed that it was a rule of his. Okay, so let me back up. I think you testified earlier that one of the ways, if you broke a rule, one thing that the defendant sometimes did was had you stay in a room. Is that correct? Yes, yes. Did there come a time when the defendant, in fact, made you stay in a room because you had broken a rule? Yes. Do you remember the first time that happened? Yes. Where did that happen? That happened in Chicago. Where in Chicago? At the studio on Ohio Street. And do you remember what led to that? Yes. What happened? I had gone shopping with Juice, and she had tried to convince me to get sweats in a size large, and I had got them in an extra small, and he had told me that anything that came from her was coming from him, and I didn't listen to her. And when you said he had told you that anything that came from her was coming from him, who is the him in that sentence? The defendant. And who is the her in that sentence? Juice. Do you recall whether or not what size sweats you bought that day? I did buy extra small from Hollister. What is Hollister? Hollister is a clothing store for like a lot of teens. What happened? Do you remember where you went after you went shopping that day? Yes, we went back to the studio. The studio on Ohio Street? Yes. What happened when you got back to the studio? I had tried on my clothes like I usually do after I was done shopping, and I tried on my sweats, and who, if anyone, was present for when you tried on your sweats? Him and Juice were present. The defendant and Juice. Yes. What happened? He had saw the sweats on me and he wasn't happy, and he then said, "Didn't Juice tell me to get a size large?" And I said, "Yes." You said the defendant wasn't happy. What made you believe the defendant wasn't happy? Because I had went against what Juice had told me to do. What, if anything, did the defendant do or say, though, that made you think he wasn't happy? He did, in fact, leave me in that room. When you said he did, in fact, leave you in that room, what are you talking about? I was in the 5-star at the time, and he basically felt that I felt like I didn't do anything wrong, and so as a punishment, he said I couldn't leave out of the room until I admitted to what I had done. You mentioned the 5-star. What do you mean by 5-star? The 5-star was a room inside of his Ohio Street studio, which he would have parties in on the weekend, and when you were trying on the clothes that you had purchased in front of the defendant and Juice, where in the studio were you? We were in the 5-star. And how did the defendant express to you that he wanted you to stay in the 5-star room? He told me that I cannot leave out of this room until I admit what I should have done. What happened then? I didn't leave outside of the room for about 3 to 4 days. What? Where was the defendant when you were in the room? I don't know. Did you see him? What do you mean? And that was Ariel asking her, what did she mean by did she see him? While you were in the room for 3 to 4 days, what, if any, contact did you have with the defendant? Oh, he would come in and he would check on me and ask me, was I ready to be honest? And I would express that I didn't have anything to be honest about, and he would leave again. What, if anything, did you understand the defendant wanted you to do while you were in that 5-star room at the Ohio Street studio? He wanted me to admit that I should have listened to Juice and that I should have gotten the sweats in a size large. What, if anything, did you eat while you were in the room? Food was brought to me, and I would know because they would knock on the door. And when you say they would knock on the door, what specifically did you hear? I would just hear a knock on the door. And what, if anything, would you do when you heard a knock on the door? The defendant would always tell me anytime I heard a knock to wait 30 seconds before opening the door to give whoever it was time to leave. Get it. So as you sit here today, do you know who brought the food while you were in the 5-star room for 3 to 4 days? I do not. Did there come a time, you testified that you were in there for 3 to 4 days. What, if anything, happened that allowed you finally to leave that room? I had admitted that I was wrong and that I would have listened to Juice, and I should have listened to Juice. How did you admit that you were wrong? I had physically told him when he had came in the room. How did he respond once you told him that you were wrong? He was happy. And then Connick interjects and says, objection. Then Donnelly says, well, when you say he was happy, how did you know that? Ariel, because afterwards I immediately left the room and he let me go into the studio with him. Now, to be clear, the room where you were staying for the 3 to 4 days, was there a lock on the door? There is not. And what, if anything, did you think would happen if you did walk out of the room? I would get in trouble even more. And what did you think? What do you mean by that? I didn't know what would happen, but I just knew that I would probably get in even more trouble if I did choose to leave out of that room. You testified earlier about a time in which the defendant used his shoe to hit you. Do you recall that? Yes, I do. Aside from spankings, did you ever see the defendant physically hit or assault another of those females that were living with him? Yes, I have. What did you see? Personally, what did you see? I have seen him slap his other living girlfriends open palm. I have seen him drag them by their hair. I have seen him punch them in their face and all over their bodies, and I have also seen him hit them with objects. What objects have you seen the defendant hit them with? I've seen the defendant also use shoes, and I did see him use a cord of some sort. How did that make you feel? I felt like I needed to listen even more because that could also happen to me. Judge Donnelly, Miss Geddes, just whenever you're ready, if it's a good time to break, I just want to give the jurors their afternoon break. Now, child, y'all just came back from lunch. How you ready to go to the break already? They must be cutting stuff out of this transcript because they hopping all over the place. So then Miss Geddes said, we can take a break right now. And then Donnelly said, okay. So folks, we'll break for 15 minutes or so. Please don't talk about the case at all, but we'll see you in a few minutes. Let me pause this and look and see if there is a skip in the page numbers here. Okay, I don't see a break. I mean, the page numbers are continuing on, or maybe I've been reading longer than I thought I have. So then the jury exits the courtroom, and then Donnelly is like, all right, everybody can sit down. All right, anything before we break? And then Connick says, Your Honor, just relating to the government eliciting testimony. And then Donnelly said, I can't hear you. And then Connick said, as it relates to the government eliciting testimony regarding Mr. Kelly's prior criminal proceeding. Donnelly, right. So then Connick said, we will consent to the government actually asking him about it being a prior proceeding, a prior court proceeding. And then Donnelly said, I can't remember I'm going to have to go back and look at what my ruling was at the time that you didn't take advantage of it, but I think it should be the same ruling. The reasoning is the same. And then Connick replied, well, I think your ruling was with another witness, and at that time you indicated that the door was open. There's going to be a door opening with respect to this witness, and it wasn't elicited at that time, and the government did not go back on redirect and ask the witness anything about it. Donnelly, I think she tried, and I sustained the objection because it was beyond the scope. That's my recollection. Geddes, I know. Donnelly, well, if you call it a prior proceeding, the point is in addition to, it's not just because I made the ruling with respect to another witness. It's because it's relevant to establish why she did what she did. So I'll permit it for that purpose, but you can refer to it as a prior proceeding. Geddes, but I think, Your Honor, you previously had advised that there's already been testimony in the record about a prior court proceeding. Here, the witness, I think, needs to explain that the reason why she was not truthful about her age was because the defendant was on trial for a crime involving a minor. Donnelly, well, you can call it. You can say, I don't think you'll have a problem, but there was testimony that there was a trial, and you can say that the subject was his. What did we agree on before? You don't have to say it's a criminal trial. I mean, it's just not necessary. Geddes, a trial? Donnelly, it's a trial involving conduct with a minor. Canick, I would object to that, Your Honor. I think that if there's a question, ask whether, in order for the witness to, I guess, give what she thinks is the rationale for her saying that she was 18, well, there was a prior court proceeding. Donnelly, that's what I just said. Canick, right, but not regarding a minor. Donnelly, no, we are. No. I mean, the whole reason why, just the fact that it is a prior proceeding doesn't really say a whole lot, but that's what her concern was, that it was because she was also a minor. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any sense. Canick, Judge. Donnelly, I mean, do you plan to cross-examine her about it like you did the last witness about why she lied to him about how old she was? Canick, I didn't focus on that with this. Donnelly, I understand. Canick, as I recall from the 302s, she's saying that it was her parents who told her to tell him that she was 18. Nothing to do with her. It wasn't thought. It was her parents' thought, her mother's thought. Donnelly, well, let's do this. You know, you can do the examination with her, and just in excess of caution, I'll do what I did the last time. If you question her about that and the door is open, I'll permit the government to bring out some more information about that, and it will be really just the same thing. So you can continue the examination when you do your cross. If you challenge her on that as you did the last witness, then I'll let the government ask what they're going to ask. Canick, very well. Geddes, so, Your Honor, I may go back and let the witness know what I previously told them? Donnelly, all right. Geddes, but with respect to when I asked her about what, if anything, the defendant said about the reason for the letter, she will answer that the defendant told her that it was because his attorneys told him to do it. I assume she had that statement. Donnelly, she already said that. Geddes, no, I hadn't asked the witness. Donnelly, but she did say something about talking to lawyers, didn't she? Geddes, she did. Donnelly, I think it's fine that he's talking to lawyers. I don't understand counsel to be objecting to that. The discrete objection is referring to the prior criminal proceedings, which I did preclude inquiry on, and I permitted it the last time because the defense quite clearly opened the door to it. It's a fair point that she hasn't really opened the door on this one because she hasn't had a chance to ask her any questions. Because he hasn't had a chance to ask her any questions. So let's do it the same way we did it the last time. And if you need to confer with the witness just to straighten that out, go ahead and do it. All right, see you in a few minutes. And so they go into recess. Now here she's saying that she precluded, which means that she wasn't going to allow it. But something that the defense said, or a question that the defense asked on the last witness who was able to talk about the prior trial, the 2008 trial, it was because the defense asked a question that opened the door, and so then she allowed it to take place. So she's basically telling Connick, now when this come up this time, you need to sit down and shut up. Don't be asking no questions, because if you ask the wrong question, then I'm going to open the door and it is going to become more in-depth. So they come back from recess and Donnelly says, all right, do we have everybody we need to have? Okay, let's get the jury. The jury enters and then Donnelly says, all right, are we ready to resume the direct examination? Go ahead. And then Geddes says, thank you. The clerk, the witness is reminded she's still under oath. Ariel, yes, thank you. And then Geddes starts her questioning and she says, you testified before we broke about a time when the defendant told you to stay in a room in the Ohio Street studio. Other than the Ohio Street studio, were there other occasions where the defendant made you stay for periods of time? Yes. What other locations do you recall the defendant made you stay for periods of time as a result of violating one of the defendant's rules in his eyes? Aside from that studio, the studio that he later had, and the Atlanta house in the tour bus, you mentioned a studio that the defendant later had. Do you remember where that studio was? It was Justine Street. The studio was located on Justine Street? Yes. In what city? Chicago. You also mentioned a tour bus. Do you remember a time when the defendant told you to stay on the tour bus? Yes, I do. Do you remember where you were located, where the tour bus was at that time? Atlanta, Georgia. And do you recall what led to the defendant telling you that you needed to stay on the tour bus? I had broken one of his rules and I did not admit to breaking one of the rules. Do you remember the particular rule that you broke that day? I do not. Do you remember approximately when it was that the defendant had you stay on the tour bus in Atlanta? It was for about 3 days. And do you remember approximately when, either in terms of your age or in terms of the time frame, this happened? I believe that this happened in 2006 or 2017. I don't recall. And what, if anything, did you do while you were on the tour bus? There wasn't nothing much that I could do but just wait for him to come on. And what, if anything, did you understand the defendant wanted you to do while you were on the tour bus? And then Canick objected, and then Donnelly said, well, did he tell you what you were supposed to do while you were on the tour bus? So Donnelly got a slick mouth, and looked like she being slick mouth to both the prosecution and the defense, if you ask me, because she done told the Geddes lady to stop leading with these questions and stop putting stuff out here, because Ariel cannot speak to Kelly's state of mind or what he was thinking. He either had to tell her or he didn't tell her. And so Ariel says it was just a punishment to not be around him. And then Donnelly said, okay, next question. Then Geddes continues and she says, do you recall whether you had food that time in Atlanta when you were on the tour bus for how long did you say it was? And then she says about 3 days. Now this girl saying she had to sit on a tour bus for 3 days. Do we believe that? I think not. Do you recall whether or not you had food while you were on the tour bus for about 3 days? I did, yes. And how did you receive the food? There was a fridge and a microwave, and occasionally, if he ate, they would bring it and leave it underneath the curtain. And when you say curtain, what are you referring to? The tour bus, there was a curtain in the front where no one could see inside of the back of the tour bus. And you said that they would bring it to you. Did you see who was bringing the food? Never. How would you know that the food was ready or that there was food for you? Because I would hear them put it underneath the curtain, and then I would hear the tour bus door shut and lock. And just to be clear again, was the tour bus locked from the inside? I don't know. I never tried to open it. It's always been unlocked getting on or off for me. Okay, but when you were on the tour bus that day for a period of time, you didn't try to open it? Is that what you're saying? Yes, I did not. Now, to your knowledge, were any of the other females who were living with the defendant at that time ever subjected to the same punishment where they had to stay in a room or a location for a period of days on account of the defendant believing they had violated a rule? Yes. How did you know that? Because they would not be around for a few days and we would just know not to ask. Not to ask whom? Him. Like where were they? And again, him, who are you referring to? The defendant. Do you recall what happened on December 28th of 2015? I do not. Miss Geddes, I'm showing the witness. So this is Geddes talking, I think, to the judge. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 935B. Do you recognize what's shown in 935B? I do, yes. Does that refresh your recollection as to what, if anything, happened on December 28th of 2015? It does, yes. And that day, December 28th, how old were you? What year is this? And then Azrael asks, what year is this? 2015? Yes, I was 17. And when were you turning 18? December 30th. What, if anything, do you recall happening on December 28th of 2015? Me and the defendant had gotten into an argument. And do you recall the nature of the argument? Yes, I do. What was it about? He had expressed to me that he didn't celebrate holidays because he no longer had his family, and I felt if he did not want to celebrate the holidays, I could have been home with my family celebrating. Now, we talking about a man that keep a Christmas tree up year round, had a Christmas tree up and lit in the studio when the building inspectors went in, had trees up, like multiple trees, I believe, in his condo at the Trump Tower, but he doesn't celebrate the holidays. I mean, I guess that's possible. I mean, he celebrates every day, I guess, because he says that the Christmas reminds him of his mother, and that's why he loved Christmas trees. That's why he keeps them up. So, Azrael, you're kind of contradicting yourself here. But anyway, did you tell the defendant that? I did, yes. How did the defendant respond? He was upset with me. What, if anything, did the defendant do or say towards you? He did make me leave, stay in the room. Do you recall what room you were in? This was at the studio. Where was the studio? On Justine. And was that in downtown Chicago? Yes. The government exhibit 935B, generally speaking. What are those? What is that? It is a text message of what I sent my best friend at the time. On what date? December 29th. Then Geddes, the government offers 935B. Donnelly, any objections? Canick, no. Donnelly, all right, that's in evidence. Geddes, may I publish, please? Donnelly, yes. Is this jury only? Or, then Geddes said, no, it can go beyond the jury. Then she asked the question, can you, starting from the bottom, can you read the text messages starting from the bottom and moving up? And just to be clear, who wrote these text messages? I sent these text messages. Okay, can you read what's shown on 935B, beginning where my pen is pointing? Yes. I just felt to rebel, so I did. And then I was like, can I take a shower? Can I take a shower? And he was like, no, you're going to stay in the room until you tell me why you. And there are 3 dots after that. What does that represent? There was no more to the text message. Just not shown on this particular? Yes. And reading above that, what did you write? First of all, I never had an attitude. You always think someone mad. And above that, and then I kept calling and texting him over and over. And above that, and he was like, no, you text me why you had an attitude first. In those text messages, when you refer to he, who are you referring to? The defendant. And in that first text message that you read, the one on the bottom where my pen is pointing, where it says, and he was like, no, you're going to stay in the room until you tell me why. And then it continues. What did you mean by that? I had expressed to him that I had an attitude because if he didn't want to celebrate Christmas, I could have been home. What did you mean by saying that? He was like, no, you're going to stay in the room. Meaning that I could not leave the room until I apologized for having the attitude. Do you remember what room within the Justine Street studio you were in? The control room. What, if anything, did you understand that? What, if anything, did you do while you were in that room? There was nothing in that room for me to do. There was only a TV in that room. What, if any, communication did you have with the defendant? I did have my phone. However, he was ignoring all the calls and texts that I had until I had admitted why I had attitude. Did you eventually admit that you had an attitude? I did, yes. Did you believe you in fact had an attitude? I did not, no. How did you admit to the defendant that you had an attitude? How would you convey that to the defendant? I would have to have been really remorseful, and I would have to have had to have fed his ego. Specifically, what would you have done to convey that to the defendant? I would have to have said exactly what he wanted to hear. What did you say that to? Who did you say that to? To the defendant, to his face? Yes. Did you ever write letters? Yes, I did. What letters would you write? I would write many letters. When you were in a room as a result of violating a rule, would you ever write letters to the defendant? Yes, I would. If I did not have my phone, yes. Were there times when you were in the room without your phone? Yes. Why would you be in a room without your phone? Because he would take it as a punishment. What would you write in the letters? It would have to be an apology for a rule that I had broken. What, if anything, would you do with the letter that you wrote? I would have to give it to him, and he would basically read it. How would you give it to the defendant? I would just give him the sheet of paper, and sometimes he would make me read it in front of him, or he would leave with it and then come back at another time. Do you recall an occasion where your first letter was not sufficient? Yes, I do. What happened? If it was attitude in the letter, then I would still be stuck in the room, and I would have to rewrite the letter. Who determined if there was attitude in the letter? The defendant. I'm showing, may I approach, Your Honor? And then Donnelly said yes, and then she said, I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 926. Do you recognize what's shown in Government Exhibit 926? Yes, I do. Generally speaking, what are they? That is pictures of the studio on 209 North Justine Street. Now, do you recognize the time frame from which these photos were taken? Yes, I do. When were they approximately taken? When do they appear to show? What time period? We had already left the studio. And what year was that? 2019. And just to be clear, where was the Justine studio? 209 North Justine Street, Chicago, Illinois. And are the photographs contained in Government Exhibit 926 fair and accurate photos of how that studio appeared at the times when you were there? And these must be the pictures, guys, that's running in the video feed of... I'm trying to think. I may not have even put those pictures in there, but I'll put them in here if I didn't. But there were pictures of all the rooms in the studio, and you could see like the bedrooms and the control room and all of that stuff. So it says, no, some are, not all. Have you seen, though, the studio look the way that it looks in these photos? Yes, I have. Geddes, the government offers 926, Canic objection. Dunley, well, I think you've got to specify which ones are fair and accurate recommendations and which ones aren't. At least that's the way I understand the witness testimony. Geddes, let me, and then Donnelly cut her off and said, is that your objection? And then Canic said, yes, Your Honor. And then Geddes said, sorry, I didn't hear your objection. And then Donnelly said, it's not just me, because she's constantly having to tell Canic to talk into the microphone. Why don't you take the exhibit to her and have her show you which ones are not fair and accurate representations? That might be the fastest way. And then Geddes, I can do that. Let me just ask one preliminary question. Donnelly, okay. So you said that there were certain things that were different in these photos than some of the time you were in the Justine Street studio. Yes. What was different generally? The bedrooms. They actually all had beds in them in which he had his workers remove them. Okay, aside from the type of furniture in there are these photos. Everything else is accurate, so the structure is the same. Yes, as it was when you were there. Yes. And you guys remember she's talking about when he was being evicted, and then the building inspectors wanted to come in and tour the place because they weren't allowed to use it as housing, and they wanted to see if there were any modifications had been done to the warehouse, that type of thing. And then there were like all these pictures that were taken that were in the media showing that there were bedrooms, there was a living area, the bathrooms looked like they were set up for personal use and that type of thing. So then Geddes says, is it fair to say that there are just some photos where the furniture is a little bit different? Yes. All right. So Geddes, may I approach? Donnelly, well, with that proviso, I know I'm pronouncing that word wrong, but anyway, if that's the only difference, do you object to the photos going in? Canick said yes. And then Donnelly, okay, I guess you can now go through them all. Then Geddes, all right. There are different page numbers, so I'll refer to the page numbers. Donnelly, why don't you give them to the witness? Just go through and tell us which one is different. Azriel, okay, so this is the master bedroom that was renovated, and it did not look like this initially. Donnelly, didn't look like this what? Azriel, meaning that this was a bedroom that we had gotten renovated. Donnelly, right? Azriel, so this is what it looked like. Donnelly, so that's correct, right? And then Azriel, yes. Donnelly, just go through the ones that are not. Canick, are they numbered? Donnelly, yes, they are numbered. So when you get to one that doesn't fairly and accurately represent the way it looked, tell us what number it is and why it is not a fair and accurate representation. Okay, 016 is not accurate. There was a bedroom in this room. Donnelly, so there is missing furniture. Azriel, yes. Donnelly, all right. So that's 16. Azriel, 018 is also missing furniture. Donnelly, okay. Azriel, 019 is the same picture of 018, just a different angle. Donnelly, and when you say it's missing furniture, what kind of furniture is it missing? It was bunk beds in that room. All right. And this is her and Donnelly going back and forth. And then N020 is missing furniture. And then Geddes says, and what furniture is missing from that one? And then Azriel said, a bedroom. And then Donnelly said, meaning bedroom furniture. Azriel, yes, a master bed was in there. And also 025 is missing furniture. There was a bed in there as well. And then Geddes, aside from that, are those fair, accurate photographs of how the studio on Justine Street appeared? Yes. And the photographs shown on pages 16, 18, 19, 20, and 25 are those fair and accurate photographs of the room themselves, with the fact just that the furniture is different? Yes. Geddes, the government offers government exhibit 926. Donnelly, any objections? Canick, I just want to see them. Donnelly, where you have copies of them, don't you? Canick, no. Geddes, here. Canick, thanks. Then he pauses and then he says, just one question of voir dire. Donnelly, sure. So voir dire examination by Mr. Canick. Question, when were these pictures taken? And then Azriel, these pictures were taken after we had already left the studio. When you said we, who are you talking about? Me, the defendant, and Joy. Do you have an approximate if? And then he's cut off and Donnelly says, it's very hard to hear you. And then Canick says, do you have an approximation as to what year that was? And then Azriel said 2019, meaning even though he had the studio, he was behind in bills, so we had. And then Canick cut her off and says, that's not what I'm asking you. I asked you specifically, was this in 2019? Donnelly said she answered it. She said it was in 2019. All right. Any more questions? Canick, no, I'm good. Donnelly, any objection? Canick, no objection. Donnelly, all right. They're in evidence. Government Exhibit 926 is smart. Geddes, I am showing the witness. I'm showing everyone that's in evidence as Government Exhibit 926. Direct examination continues. So Geddes is once again questioning Ariel. I'm going to show you page 29. Do you recognize what's shown on Government Exhibit on 29? Yes. What is that? This is a control room, and at the time, on December 28th of 2015, where the defendant told you to stay in a room for a period of days, where were you told to stay? In the control room. And what, if anything, was in the control room when you were there in 2015? It looked very similar to this, and it had two different chairs, which were more like day chairs, and a black couch in there. Geddes, and if I turn the page to page 31 of that same exhibit, can you see what's shown there? Yes. What is that? That is the black couch that was put in the studio in 2015. Okay, and is that just another angle from within the control room? Yes, it is. Before lunch, I believe you testified that the defendant told you to delete your social media accounts. Do you recall that testimony? Yes, I do. Do you follow that rule? Did you follow that rule? I did not. At any point, did the defendant learn that you had not deleted your social media account? Yes. How did the defendant learn? There was once I was actually on Snapchat and he had walked into the room. Where were you when this happened? The control room. The same control room that I just showed you? Yes. In the studio on Justine Street? Yes. What, if anything, were you doing when the defendant entered the room? I believe that I was making a video. I was in the middle of working out. Do you remember how old you were when this happened? I was 17, and you said you were making a video. Can you explain what you were making a video of? It was just a selfie video of myself in which I had planned to send to my immediate friends. And what application were you using? Snapchat. How did the defendant respond when he came into the room? He was very angry and he ended up taking my phone and breaking it. What, if anything, did the defendant say? He asked me who was I talking to and had I been talking to guys. How did you respond? I told him I had not been talking to anyone. What did the defendant do? He then took the phone and broke it. Did you see him break it? Yes, I did. How did the defendant break your phone? He slammed it. On what? On the ground. Do you remember what type of phone you had? It was an iPhone. And after the defendant slammed the phone to the ground, what happened? After that, he had left me in the room. And when you say he left you in the room, what do you mean by that? Meaning that I had to stay in the room until he came back whenever he cooled down. How did you know? Why did you believe you had to stay in the room? Because it was a rule of his. But what, if anything, did he do to convey to you that you needed to stay in the room? He told me that I could not leave the room. What, if any? Where did the defendant then go? I don't know. Did he stay in the room? No, he left. What did you do while you were inside the room? I wrote a letter apologizing. Do you remember what you wrote in the letter, generally speaking? I was very remorseful because he eventually forgave me. How, if at all, were you able to give the defendant the letter that you wrote? When he would come into the room, I would give him the sheet of paper. And what, if any, do you remember how the defendant responded? He would take it, and if it was to his liking, he would come back in, and he would then chastise me, and I would be forgiven. And when you say chastise, that he chastised you, what again do you mean by that? Meaning that I was spanked. By whom? By the defendant. And what did he use to spank you? His open palm. On what part of your body? On my legs and my butt. And were you clothed when he spanked you? I was not. Now you mentioned earlier that the defendant told you that the defendant didn't want you to talk about him and you with others. Do you recall that testimony? Yes, I do. Did you always follow that rule? I did not. Was there ever a time when the defendant learned that you had not followed that rule? Yes. What happened? It would usually result in me getting chastised. Do you remember a particular instance where the defendant learned that you had been talking about personal business? In Atlanta, yes. What happened? That is the incident that I already expressed. Girl, Azrael, I'm glad you said that, because I'm sitting there, look, scrolling up and down, trying to see if I done messed around and went back up to the top and reading the same thing over again. But she is asking the same questions over and over. So then Geddes said, oh, the one you testified earlier about involving Mia. Yes. You testified earlier about an individual named Juice. Do you recall that this morning? Yes, I do. At the time when you met Juice, who did you understand Juice to be? He had expressed to me that Juice was a homegirl of his that was in town from Chicago. And did you later learn that Juice had a different relationship with the defendant? Yes, I did. What did you learn? That she was actually a live-in girlfriend of the defendant. And what, if anything, then she pauses, what, if any, instructions did Juice give to you? Juice would basically tell me, you should try to tell me what to wear or how to dress or not to talk to men or just to ignore specific situations. Or she would try to tell her that. And what, if anything, did you think about the instructions that you were receiving from Juice? Initially, I didn't know that they were coming from him, so I didn't care. Do you recall having any conversations with other people about that? Yes, I do. Who do you remember telling? I had expressed to my family. What did you express to your family? That I did not like Juice, and because she was trying to tell me everything to do. And at any point, did the defendant learn about that? Yes, he did. How did the defendant learn? He happened to check my phone and he saw it. What did he see? He saw that I had texted my parents and I had expressed that Juice was basically acting like a PO and that I didn't like her. And wait, what do you mean by a PO? Meaning that every little detail she would be trying to tell me, no, you can't do this, you can't do this, or you can't do that, or you can't just leave out. And I thought that it was very bizarre for her, another woman, to be telling me what I could and could not be doing. And I'm giving you that with the neck roll, y'all. So then Geddes says, and when you say PO, what does PO stand for? Like a police officer. Girl, PO is a parole officer, okay? Anyway, what did the defendant do, if anything, when he saw that you had been communicating about Juice with your family? He immediately made me text them and apologize and say that everything was on good terms between me and Juice. And did you do that? I did, yes. What, if anything, else happened? After that, I never mentioned Juice to them again. You testified earlier about a sexual contact that you had with the defendant, including while you were 17. Did you also have sexual contact with other women in the defendant's presence? Yes, I did. Whose idea was it for you to have sexual contact with others in the presence of the defendant? It was the defendant's choice. At the defendant's direction, did you have sexual contact? Mr. Cannick, objection. Donnelly, I haven't heard the question yet. Geddes, may I continue? Donnelly, well, don't lead if that's what you're starting to do. Geddes, all right. How many people did you have sexual contact with at the same time? Every setting was different. It was whatever the defendant wanted. However, there were times where it was everybody and girlfriend, meaning there were times where it could possibly be a woman that he knew in Chicago for a weekend. But fair to say it was more than one. Yes. Now, who would choose which female you would have the sexual encounter with on a particular occasion? The defendant. I'm showing what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 52B. Who is that again? That's Juice. Did you ever have any sexual encounters with Juice? I did, yes. Whose idea was that? The defendant's. Do you recall how old you were when you first had a sexual encounter with Jews? I was 17. I'm showing the witness that's in evidence and government exhibit 69B. Who is that? Meek. Did you ever have a sexual encounter with defendant with Meek? I did. Yes. Whose idea was that? The defendant's. I'm showing what's in evidence as government exhibit 72. Who is that? V. Who the hell is Meek? Are they trying to say Neek? I'm confused here. Anyway, did you ever have a sexual encounter with V? I did, yes. Whose idea was that? The defendant's. And I'm showing what's in evidence as government 78. Who is that? Joy. Did you ever have sexual encounter with her? I did, yes. Whose idea was that? The defendant's. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as government exhibit 76. Without saying that individual's name, do you recognize who that is? I do, yes. And how did you meet that individual? Through the defendant. What, if any, sexual contact did you have with that individual? We were intimate, yes. Whose idea was that? It was the defendant's. The government offers government exhibit 76. Donnelly, any objection? Canick, no. Donnelly, all right, that's in evidence. Is that for the jury or for Geddes? Yes, you can publish it. Government exhibit 76 was received in evidence. Exhibit published. And then back to Geddes. And I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as government exhibit 77. Do you recognize government exhibit 77? I do, yes. Without saying her name, how did you meet her? Through the defendant. And what, if anything, what, if any, sexual contact did you have with that individual? We were intimate. Whose idea was that? The defendant's. The government offers government exhibit 77. Canick, no objection. Donnelly, okay, that's in evidence. And then she says, may I publish? And then she goes on to say, and this is Geddes talking. Now you just testified about sexual contact that you had with a number of females. Was the defendant present when you had sexual contact with those individuals? Every time. Was there ever a time when he wasn't present? Never. Who, if any, of the defendant's employees did he ask you to have sexual contact with? Canick, objection, Your Honor. Donnelly, overruled. Because first of all, she leading the witness because she's saying, who, if any, of the defendant's employees did he ask you? Like, we ain't even brought up the whole thing about, it should be, did the defendant ever ask you to have sex with one of his employees? So then, after the overrule, Ariel said, a few, actually. Do you remember their names? Lily and Cassandra, I believe. Well, ain't Lily the, Lily the friend? Oh, okay, child, all right. Anyway, I believe. And then so she said, I'm sorry. Canick, I object to the last response. Donnelly, overruled. Geddes, I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as government exhibit 41. The witness only. Do you recognize government exhibit 41? I do. Who is that? That is Cassandra. Is that the Cassandra that you just mentioned the defendant had you have sexual contact with? Yes, it is. Geddes, government offers government exhibit 41. Donnelly, any objection? Canick, no. Donnelly, okay, that's in evidence. Geddes, and I'm now showing what's been marked for identification to just the witness only. Government exhibit 42. What's shown in government exhibit 42 do you recognize? Yes, I do. Who is that? That is Lily. And is Lily is the individual you identified as Lily the same Lily that you just testified the defendant had you have sexual encounters with? Yes, she is. So then they offer it. Into evidence. Donnelly asks, is there any objections? Canick said no. And then it is entered into evidence. And then Geddes, aside from the women who you just identified, were there other women or other females with whom the defendant directed you to have a sexual encounter with? Yes. Do you know the names of those individuals? Without saying them, do you know their names? Yes. Donnelly, hold on just 1 second. All right. Does anybody on the jury need a break? The juror, no. Can I talk to you at the side? Donnelly, oh, well, I don't need you to address it here. No. Can you wait for a few minutes, or do you have to talk to her now? We're going to take a 5-minute break. Please don't talk about the case, and you can address whatever issue you have with Miss Green, all right? The courtroom deputy, all rise. Jury exits the courtroom. Donnelly, all right, the witness can step down. A recess was taken at 4:32 p.m. The court, which is Donnelly, let's bring them back if we're all done. One of the jurors says he can't see the picture. Geddes, I'll keep them on for a longer period of time. I can show them again. Donnelly, all right, and I'll give them an instruction that they'll be able to see them when they're deliberating as well. I do have, she pauses, I know you don't want me to ask this question, but do you have any idea how long your direct will be? Donnelly is over this. She's like, this has gone on long enough. So then Geddes replies, it's going to be the rest of the day, but I'm hoping that I will be finished or very near finished. Donnelly, okay, all right. Everybody can sit down. Sorry, should we get the witness? Let's get the witness back. Yes. There's a pause in the proceedings. The witness resumes the stand. Donnelly, all right, let's get the jury, please. The courtroom deputy, all rise. Jury enters the courtroom. The courtroom deputy, you may be seated. Geddes, may I proceed? Donnelly, yes, go ahead. The courtroom deputy, the witness is reminded she is still under oath. Donnelly, before you do proceed, I just want to remind you, there are lots of pieces of evidence coming in, and I've asked the Assistant United States Attorney to make sure that it's up for a long enough time for you to take a look at it. But also, you don't have to commit any of these things to memory. In your final deliberations, you'll have access to all of the evidence during your deliberations. So with that, you can go ahead. Geddes, Your Honor, may I briefly just show the photos that I previously put on the Elmo? Donnelly, let's continue, and then we'll, go ahead and show them. That's fine. Geddes, okay, I'll file, be brief. This is Government Exhibit 78, 52B, 69B, 72, 76, 77, 41, 42. Then direct examination continues. So Geddes introduces Exhibit 42, and then they continue the direct examination. And she says, all right, you testified that in addition to the females that I just placed on the screen for the jury, that there were, in addition, that other females that defendant asked you to have sexual contact or told you to have sexual contact with. Is that correct? Yes. And do you recall some of the names of those individuals? Not all of them, but yes, a few. Who do you remember? There was a girl by the name of Chrissy. There was another woman by the name of Auntie April. Lord, they better not be talking about Darlene April. And those are the only two names that I know. And where there additional individuals, I think there should be were there additional individuals, additional females who the defendant directed you to have sex with, whose names you do not currently remember. Yes. Did you always know the names of the individuals who you had sexual contact with at the defendant's direction? No. Canick, objection. Donnelly, I didn't hear. I'm sorry, Mr. Canick. Canick, objection to the characterization of that question. Direction. Donnelly, overruled. How frequently did you have sexual encounters with females? Whenever the defendant wanted it. So it could be every day, back to back, or it could be every 2 days, or during those sexual encounters, who, if anyone, was in charge? The defendant was always in charge. And why do you say that? Because he told everyone exactly what to do. Who would he tell what to do? Me and the other women. What types of things would he say, or what types of things would he tell you or the other females to do? He would orchestrate everything. So again, if he wanted one person to walk while someone was giving him oral head, then that's what it would be. If he wanted to have vaginal penetration while making the other person walk, while the other person would walk or crawl, then that's what it would be. Were any of these sexual encounters recorded? Yes, they were. Who recorded them? The defendant. With what were these encounters recorded? With an iPad. And again, how old were you when these sexual encounters with other females began? I was 17. Did you want any of these sexual encounters with other women? Never. Why did you do it? Because he would force me to do so. How so? Sometimes it would be a punishment, and other times he would tell me to come to the room and he would already be in the middle of an act. Were there times when you resisted having an encounter with a female? Yes, there were. What, if anything, happened when you resisted? He would usually tell me to wait in another room until he was done, and I, as usually, chastised. And where would the defendant tell to, where would the defendant tell to you wait? I think that's supposed to be tell you to wait. If we were in a hotel, then I would have to wait in the restroom, or if we were, regardless of where we were, I would usually have to wait in a restroom or another room that was near where he was having intercourse. And you said that after that you would see the defendant. Yeah, I would have to wait until he was done. And what do you mean again by the defendant would chastise you? Meaning that he would spank me. And why did you understand the defendant was spanking you? Because he wanted to perform the specific way. He wanted me to perform the specific way, and I did not do so. And what specifically did he want you to perform? He wanted me to be intimate with another woman, with other women. You testified that there were a recording made. Were those video recordings? Yes, they were. Did you ever see any of those video recordings? Yes, I did. In what context would you see video recordings of sexual encounters between you and the other females? If you wanted to play it back and show you, he would, but it would usually be us in the middle of having intercourse or oral sex. And what would happen in the middle of that? He would just be playing back what he had just done. For what reason or why did you understand he was doing that? To have you to brag and boast about it. Who chose the women who you had those encounters with? The defendant. You testified earlier that you were homeschooled for your senior year of high school. Is that right? Yes. Did you graduate? I did, yes. And after you graduated high school, did you consider attending college? At that time, no, I did not. Why not? Because I had already forfeited all of my scholarships. What do you mean by that? I was no longer taking vocal classes or patriot singers, so there was really no other scholarships that I had been pursuing. You testified that earlier that you were with the defendant for part of the Black Panties tour as well as the buffet tour. Did you accompany the defendant on any other tours? Yes, he had an after-party tour. Do you remember when that was? I do not remember the year that it started, no. When the defendant was not on tour, where would you usually spend your time? In that city or cities? Atlanta, in Georgia. When you were in Chicago, where would you spend your nights? The studio. Which studio? In the beginning of 2015, the Ohio, and later the Justine Street studio. And is the Justine Street studio the studio where the photos in Government Exhibit 926 were of? Yes. Over the time that you were with the defendant, who, if anyone else, stayed at the Justine Street studio? All of his other live-in girlfriends. And where in the studio would they stay? Everyone had their own place. And by place, where was it? What do you mean? Well, I mean, usually Juice and V had a room. Meek was usually in the master bedroom or the bunk bedroom. Joy was usually in the living room. And me and the defendant were usually in a downstairs living room on the couch. Now, you testified earlier that some of the photos in 926 were different than how you remembered them because there was furniture missing. Is that right? That is correct. And what type of furniture was missing? The majority of bedrooms were taken out of the studio. And were those the bedrooms where Juice and Joy, Meek and V, and you and the defendant slept? Yes, it was. What, if any, rules did the defendant have for the manner in which you interacted with men other than the defendant? We cannot talk to any men at all. When you were in an elevator, what would you do? We would have to turn around. And when you say we, who are you referring to? All of his living girlfriends, including Juice and Joy and Meek and V? Yes. And why did you understand that you should turn around when you entered an elevator? Because we were not allowed to look at men. Who told you that? The defendant. And when you say turn around in an elevator, what were you facing? I would have to face the corner. How about when you went to a nail salon? What, if any, restrictions were there? Did the defendant have for you when you went to a nail salon? If there was a man working, then I would not be able to go into the establishment. What would you do? I would have to leave out and call him immediately and let him know that there was a man working. What, if anything, did the defendant typically carry with him? He carried a backpack. Candid objection. Donnelly, overruled. Geddes, did he carry it himself or did someone carry it on his behalf? It was both. Who would carry? When someone else was carrying it, who would carry it? Sometimes he would give it to me and any of his other living girlfriends, and sometimes he would give it to his assistants. Which of his assistants might he give it to? His Uncle Bug. Did you ever have an opportunity to look inside his backpack? Yes. What did you see in it? Usually it was only iPads, a white tee, maybe like basketball shorts, and usually a dildo. How many iPads did you see in the defendant's backpack at once? Y'all, I'm just going to pretend like I didn't read the last word in that last sentence. I'm just reading over it, okay? So, did you ever attend basketball games with the defendant? Yes, I did. What did you do during those basketball games? I would sit with the other living girlfriends on the side. Who, if anyone else, would you sit with other than the living girlfriends? An assistant. And what would you do during the basketball games? We would just have to watch the defendant play and only him. And what do you mean by watch only him? Like if we ended up looking at another man, we would get a chastising for it. And what do you mean by chastising? A spanking. How often did you watch the defendant play basketball? Nearly every night. Where did you watch him play basketball? Usually his old school or churches would open up their basketball and nighttime for him. How would you travel around Chicago when you were in Chicago? He had 2 Sprinter vans, and anytime I needed to take a taxi. Who would travel on the Sprinter van? Me, the defendant, the driver, whichever assistant was there for the time being, and if it was everyone, then it would be me, him, and also his living girlfriends. Where would you go in the Sprinter van? We would usually just only go to parks or park outside of the cigar bar or just to get food. When he went to the cigar bar, what would you do? We would have to stay on the Sprinter until he got back. What would the defendant do? He would get off and go smoke cigars. And who was the we in that sentence when you said we would have to stay on the Sprinter van? Me and his other girlfriends. Was there a bathroom on the Sprinter van? No, there was not. What would you do if you needed to use a bathroom while you were on the Sprinter van? All of us would have to turn around and let the other person go behind the seat. Why not walk across and find a bathroom? Why not walk outside and find a bathroom? Because we weren't allowed to get off the Sprinter. Who told you that you weren't allowed to get off the Sprinter? The defendant. And again, when you say us, who are you referring to? Me and his other girlfriends. You testified that there were also some of the defendant's assistants who were sometimes on the Sprinter van. Is that right? Yes. Were there times when an assistant needed to use a bathroom? Yes. What would the assistant do? An assistant could get off and use the bathroom outside the Sprinter van? Yes. You said that you would go to the bathroom in the Sprinter van. How would you do that? They usually had gas stations like extra large cups, and they need to keep towels and tissue paper on the Sprinter. When the defendant returned to the Sprinter van after some time away, how, if at all, would you act when he returned? Everyone would have to get up and greet him and kiss him immediately. Were there times when you saw other of his live-in girlfriends break one of the defendant's rules? Yes. What, if anything, would you do? I would have to report it. Report it to whom? The defendant. Why would you do that? Because that was a rule. If you didn't, you would also get chastised for not letting him know. And how did you know about the rule? Because I had witnessed it. What do you mean? I had seen it happen to a few of the other girls. What have you seen happen? Meaning, when one of them did not let the other know, he had began to chastise them. And again, what do you mean by chastising? Spanking. While you were living with the defendant, did the defendant employ other people to fulfill certain roles for him? Yes, he did. What roles did he employ people to do? He had personal doctors, he had accountants, attorneys, assistants for his live-in girlfriends and for himself personally, and he had security. Of course, he had the tour driver. Did you testified earlier about Top Gun. Who was Top Gun again? That was his tour bus driver. And were there other individuals who drove the defendant's Sprinter or tour buses? Yes, for the most part. Tour bus, no. Sprinter, yes. Usually it was his security or his entourage or sometimes family members. Were you ever... Oh, you also mentioned that the defendant had his assistants that helped him. In particular, who were they? His assistants were usually male assistants, and for the girls, it was a female assistant. And the male assistants that the defendant had, did you learn any of their names? Yes, I did. Who were some of the male assistants? His Uncle Bug and a person, Junebug. And I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 3. I think this one is actually in evidence. Do you recognize Government Exhibit 3? Yes. Who is that? That is Junebug. And was that one of defendant's assistants? Yes. Can you put Government 3 on there, please? And I am now showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 4. Do you recognize Government Exhibit 4? Yes. Who is that? That's Uncle Bug. And what role did Uncle Bug serve for the defendant? He was his personal assistant. Can you put Government 4? Thank you. You also mentioned that the defendant had assistants and his female guests. Were you one of those female guests? Yes. Do you know the names of his assistants for his female guests? Yes. Who were they? Cheryl, Diana, the twins, Lily, Asante, and Cassandra. Do you know Cheryl's last name? Cheryl Mack. Can you put Government Exhibit 38, which is in evidence? Again, putting Government Exhibit 38 on the screen. Who is that? That is Cheryl. And you also mentioned the twins. Do you know the twins' names? Suzette and Alizette. Child, Alesiette is what they have. Alesiette, I believe. And what did they do for the defendant? They were assistants for the girls, his girlfriends. And I am showing you what's been marked for identification. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 39. Who is that? That's Suzette. The government offers 39. Any objection? And that's from Dunley. No objection. Canic. Okay, that's in evidence. Well, actually, I think that is the other twin. I'm sorry, they're twins. Dunley. So you're not sure which one it is. Azriel. They're identical twins. Dunley. All right, so that's one of the twins. Is that right? Yes, Dunley. All right. Then Geddes. And I am showing you government exhibit. And then she pauses. And then she says, I am showing the witness only what's marked for identification as government exhibit 40. Do you recognize government exhibit 40? Yes, this is Suzette. And who is she? An assistant. Was she one of the twins? Yes. And you testified earlier that these were assistants for his female guests. Who employed these assistants? The defendant. And who did these assistants work for? His female guests. Who did they take direction from? The defendant and from his girlfriends. The government offers government exhibit 40. Donley. Any objection? Canic. No. Donley. All right. That's in evidence. Geddes. I am showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as government exhibit 36. Who is shown in government exhibit 36? That's Diana. And what did Diana do? She was an assistant for his girlfriends. The government offers exhibit 36. Canic. No objection. Donley. Okay, that's in evidence. Government's exhibit 36 was received in evidence. And I am showing you showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as government exhibit 74. Do you recognize what's shown in 74? And so basically she is asking her the same questions for each one of these pictures. And in this instance, it is Asante McGee. She asks the same questions. It is entered into evidence after Canic says he doesn't have an objection. Then she goes to Cassandra, which is exhibit 42. Then she goes to Lily and she asks her, what did she do? She was an assistant for the defendant and his living girlfriends. And she continues to ask the same questions. And then she says, you testified that the defendant also employed people as security. Do you know some of the individuals who served as security for the defendant? His security was always men, but I do know of one who was a female. Now, do you know the names of any of the men who served as security for the defendant? No, I do not. You testified that there was also a female. Is that right? Yes, there was. Do you know the name of that individual? Her name was Candy. I am showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as government exhibit 22. One moment, then she pauses. Then she asks, do you recognize the individual shown in government exhibit 22? She identifies her as Candy and then reiterates that Candy was security. Then they ask if Canic has an objection. He says no, and then Dunley enters it into evidence. And then she does this she says, do you recognize government exhibit 5? Azriel says, my screen is black. And then Geddes says, I'm sorry. Can I show the witness only what's been marked for identification as government exhibit 5? Then Azriel says, yes, I do. Who is that? I believe that is a family member of the defendant. What, if anything, did he do for the defendant? He played basketball with the defendant and he did act as like an assistant. Do you know his name? I believe it was Van. Then Getty said, the government offers government exhibit 5. Your Honor, my only objection is, does she know or not? She's saying, I believe. Donnelly, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Canick, my only objection is either she knows this person or she doesn't. She believes. Donnelly, oh, okay. When you say you believe you know him, do you know the person? Ariel, yes, I do. Donnelly, okay. Ariel, I do. Donnelly, anything else? Canick, what's his name? Ariel, I don't know if he went by Van or Vance. Canick, okay, no objection, Your Honor. Donnelly, that's in evidence. Exhibit 5 was received in evidence. Geddes, was there a time when you did, in fact, become pregnant while you were with the defendant? There was. Do you remember when that was? It was in 2017. Did you have the baby? I did not. What happened? The defendant made me get an abortion. What happened? The defendant made me get an abortion. What, if anything, did he tell you? He had expressed that he still wanted me to keep my body tight and that he wanted to start a family when he had got rid of the rest of the girls. Okay, Ariel. Did you ultimately get an abortion? I did. Who arranged that appointment? The defendant and his assistant, Diana. And who took you to that appointment? Diana. Did you want to have an abortion? I did not. Geddes, I am showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 481. Your Honor, may I approach? Donnelly, yes. Geddes, did you recognize what was shown in Government 481? Yes. Canick, our screen is blank. Donnelly, that's because she was only showing her. Geddes, Government Exhibit 481. What is that? It is a conversation between me and the defendant. And do you know approximately when that took place? I didn't look at the date. I'm sorry. Do you remember what was going on when that took place? Yes, I was pregnant. And was that before you had the abortion? That was immediately after I had let him know that I was pregnant. And did this contain statements from the defendant? Yes, it does. The government offers 481. Donnelly, any objection? Canick, can I see it? Geddes, you should have 481. Donnelly, that is a question I have. Do you guys have a binder of the government's exhibits? Canick, yes. Donnelly, okay. Canick, no objection. Donnelly, all right, that's in evidence. Evidence Exhibit 481 was received in evidence. Do you want this jury only? Geddes, no, you can publish this. Donnelly, okay. Exhibit published. Geddes, I want to direct, and if you want me to bring it to you because the type is small, this one right here indicating where my pen is pointing, can you tell who wrote that particular text message? The defendant, can you read that? He said, I'm not going to lie, I was happy to know that as well. I really was, Bear, but I also was kind of thrown back the way you reacted to my reaction. I don't care what's going on in our life. I need to be trusted by you 1,000,000%. That way, when I say something, you don't have to hesitate. You do it and you go with it. And when you do that, I don't know. I just know who you are to me. I know you were young, but that is no excuse to obey me or not. Do what I tell you to do. You have some issues in that area of not doing what I tell you all when you get in trouble. You shut down and be hard-headed. You cut me off while I'm talking. Now, you didn't used to do that. Now you didn't do any of that. Believe me, God knows. I want the same things you want, but God also knows my heart. And it is never going to happen until you grow up and start to show me you are doing You are going to do what you are supposed to do because I go through too much to have to deal with. Because I go through too much to have to deal with you not giving me the information that I told you over and over to give me. When you know you're young and there's a lot of things you don't know, so when you argue back at me, it shows me that you will rebel on me, and it shows me that you're not humble as you used to be. You are young, therefore you have no say-so yet. Accept that, own it, and be glad that you have someone to make the decisions, and be thankful that all he wants, all those things with you. So make sure your motive is right before doing something like that. Make sure you want to do it because you're old enough, wise enough, and strong enough. Not just because you want to be bonded with me, because I want to groom you and be bonded with you 1,000,000% before that. Okay, so he said groom. He said he wanted to groom her in this long ass text message. Okay. And it's absolutely nothing wrong with it if you know you're going to do what you're supposed to do and get it together, or you should have no problem being patient and waiting. That's all I'm going to say. Wait now. Other than that, I love you. I'm in love with you, and I will never change my mind about me and you and us. Now get some sleep. And who wrote that? Geddes asked. The defendant. During your time with the defendant, did he ever mention his marriage to Aaliyah to you? Now let's stick a pen in here and go back to this long ass text message that Ariel say that this man wrote to her. This man did not write that long ago text message to you. Like, girl, come on, be for real. Like, do you really think we believe he wrote this long letter to you? And furthermore, we know he uses talk to text. And if you have ever used talk to text, then you know that thing be sounding out words and misspelling words, and like you might be saying R. Kelly, but it's not going to put R. Kelly. It's going to put AR. Kelly. That thing was just perfectly written, and we know doggone well that he did not write that for her. Now, you know the defense is getting out of hand, and this is probably why Judge Donnelly is agitated at this point and wants this to hurry up and wrap up. So then she goes on and says, during your time with the defendant, did he ever mention his marriage to Aaliyah to you? He did, yes, on one occasion, or more than one occasion. On more than one occasion. I want to direct your attention to a conversation that you had in front of others about Aaliyah. Do you recall where that took place? Yes, I do. Where was it? It was at a park. Who else was present for that conversation? The rest of his girlfriends. And how did the defendant's marriage to Aaliyah come up? The defendant said that we could ask him anything. What, if anything, was asked with respect to Aaliyah and his marriage to her? Canic, objection. Donnelly, overruled. We asked many questions. All of us took turns, and basically we asked him about that situation and why they basically got married. What, if anything, did the defendant say? Canic, objection. Donnelly, overruled. It's a statement of the defendant. Go ahead. I don't understand how it's a statement of the defendant when we talking hearsay here. Like, who is backing up that he actually made this statement? So the defendant had expressed to all of us that Aaliyah was pregnant and that they needed a certificate for her to be married in order for her to possibly get an abortion. What, if anything, else did the defendant say about Aaliyah? He had expressed that because she was a minor, that in order for her to get an abortion outside of her parents, the only people that could go with her was a spouse, and that was their reasoning for getting married. What, if anything, did the defendant say about a phone that Aaliyah had? He said that he had given her money and a bat phone. What did you understand the defendant to mean by a bat phone? A burner phone. Now, Connick should have objected because she basically just threw in there about that phone when there was no mention of Aaliyah and a doggone phone in this conversation. So So it says, why did you understand that to be the case? He said that he had given her a bat phone because just in case it was basically 911, an emergency, and she had no way of getting in touch with him, and that was the only time to use that phone. Did you have any other conversations with the defendant about the use of a burner phone? Yes. What were those? When I had went back to Florida to get homeschooled, he also had gave me money just in case I needed to get a bat phone. And when you said he, who are you referring to? They are talking about burner phones like this is a damn drug transaction. The defendant. During that time that you spent with the defendant, what, if anything, did he ask you to write for him? He would make us write letters. And when you say us, who are you referring to? Me and the rest of his girlfriends. How did you learn that the defendant wanted you to write letters? He had come in and he had told us it was time for us to write letters, and the other girls automatically knew what that meant, and he had basically told them to help me. Did the defendant tell you why he wanted you to write the letters? Yes. What did he say? He said because of his past. His previous attorney had made Canic objection. Donnelly overruled. Do you want to lead through this, please? Let me just see the parties over at the side. They get on Donnelly's nerves, okay? The following occurred at a sidebar. Donnelly, is this what we just talked about? Geddes, I did. I provided your Honor's ruling, but she's not going to say anything other than Canic, other than Geddes, his Donnelly, because of his past. Geddes, his attorneys told him to do it because of his past. She's not mentioning what his past is. Canic, okay, all right. Donnelly, all right. Sidebar ends. Continue on next page. Geddes, you testified that defendant told you that he wanted you to write these letters because of something his attorney had said. Is that correct? Yes. Did he tell you what he wanted to be included in this letter? Yes, he did. What did he say? He said that these were basically letters that would never see the day of light, and that they were to basically exploit us to protect him. And what, if anything, did the defendant want you to include in the letter themselves? He wanted us to include letters saying that we had stolen money from him, that we had stolen watches from him, that we had been molested by family members, that we had been abused and neglected by family members, and so forth. Had you, in fact, stolen any money from the defendant? I had not. And had you been molested by any family members? I had not. Whose idea was the particular content of a letter? It was the defendant's. From what perspective would you write the letter? We would write the letters in past tense in the sense that since we had already left and were trying to get back to him. Can you give an example of the type of letter that you might write? And actually, let me back up 1 minute. Did you write one letter or more than one letter? We wrote multiple letters, about 4 to 5 each. Can you give an example of the type of letter you had written at the request of the defendant? It would say, I'm sorry that I stole $30,000 from you. I hope that you can forgive me. Please let me back into your life. Things pertaining to that. Who, if anyone, was present when you would write these letters? The defendant and his living girlfriends. And how often would you write these letters? We would write these letters every year. And did you say you would write 4 or 5 each year? Yes. What would you do once you wrote one of these letters? He would have Juice go over them to make sure that they weren't too similar. And what happened after that? Juice will also make sure that our signature matched, and if it didn't, we would have to rewrite it. What did you understand Juice to be confirming matched? She would make us get our IDs, and she would look at the signatures on our ID, and at the end of the letter, and if it didn't match, we would have to rewrite the letter by hand. What would you do once the letter had been approved? The defendant would take them, and he said that he would give them to his attorney. Did you ever see those letters again? I would never see those letters again. You testified earlier about a video recording that the defendant made of sexual encounters with you and others. Is that right? Yes. Were there other video recordings that the defendant had you make? Yes, there were. What? He would sometimes make me make videos as punishments. Can you describe some of the videos that you made as punishment? And actually, before you do, what do you mean by punishment? Meaning that even after, oops, I accidentally closed out the screen. Okay, he would sometimes make me make videos as punishment. Can you describe what you mean? Meaning that even after I was chastised, if I broke a rule and it was very severe, then on top of me being chastised, I would have a punishment. And by chastise, what do you mean? A spanking. What are some of the recordings? Did that happen on one occasion or more than one occasion? More than one occasion. Can you describe the recordings that the defendant made you make as punishment? Yes, there was an incident where after he had chastised me over 15 times, he had pulled out an iPad and he told me to make a video saying that my father had molested me while I was still crying from his chastising me. And a grin. Just to be clear, whose idea was the content on this video? The defendant. Was any of what you said true? No, it was not. Why did you make the video? Because the defendant made me. Were there other videos that the defendant had you make? Yes, there was. Can you describe those? There was another incident in where the defendant had told Juice to get a new iPad and for me to record myself eating feces. How did that come about? This girl is so disgusting. It was a punishment, and the defendant had came to me and he said, I don't know what punishment I'm going to give you just yet. And then a few hours later, he came back and told me what it would be. And what did he tell you to do? He told me exactly what to do in the video. He told me to smear it in my face and what to exactly say and to put it in my mouth and act like I liked it, enjoyed that. And what was it that he wanted you to smear on your face? Feces. Did you do it? I did, yes. Why did you do it? Because it was a punishment. Did you want to be doing that? I did not. Where did you do that? I did that at the Justine Street studio in Chicago. What did you do with the video after? Who made the video? I made the video on the iPad. What did you do with the video after you made it? The defendant took the iPad and watched the video. How did he respond? He said that I wasn't into it enough and that I would have to redo it. Did you redo it? I did not. I'm showing the witness, sorry. I'm showing everyone what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 926, and this is page 26. What is shown on page 26? This is the first small studio room in which me and the defendant would sleep in here at times. And is there anything through this door area? Yes, it's a hallway. One moment. Donnelly, if you can find a convenient, you know, we have a few more minutes, but if you can find a convenient time to break. Geddes, I'm showing page 4 of Government Exhibit 926. What is shown in 926? The studio on 219 North Justine Street. And where my pen is pointing, what is located in that area? To the left is the restroom in where the defendant made me make the video. And what, if anything, did the defendant say about other similar videos? He has said that other girls had did the same thing. And who did you understand the defendant to mean when he referred to other girls? Neek. And did you ever see any of those videos? Never. Were there other videos that the defendant asked you to make? Not that I can recall. And you guys, she's talking about Dominique. And I thought it came out that Dominique's mom, Michelle Kramer, had lied about the whole eating the feces thing. So I don't know why Ariel is sitting up here telling this lie. So, Geddes, Your Honor, this is an okay stopping point. Donnelly, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to excuse you for the night. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, 9:30. Please don't read anything about the case. Don't speak to anybody about the case, but have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. The jury exits. Donnelly, all right. And the witness can step out. We'll see you tomorrow. Ariel, okay. And she steps down. Donnelly, all right. Do you have a sense? I don't know why I asked to try to put hope over experience, but do you know how much longer about? Geddes, I would. Donnelly, I'm not rushing you. I'm trying to get an idea of your schedule. Geddes, about an hour. Donnelly, anything else before we break for the day? Geddes, not from the government. Donnelly, anything from the defense? Canick, nothing. Donnelly, all right. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm sorry, there is one other thing. I just want to make sure. If the defense has a binder of the evidence, do they know what you're planning to introduce each day? Geddes, not each day, but there we have provided copies of each of the marked exhibits. Donnelly, I just think so we can avoid having, people asking to look at things. If you can just let them know what additional things you are going to introduce, just so they can have it at the ready, just so it doesn't waste time, okay? Geddes, thank you, Judge. Donnelly, thank you. Matter adjourned on August 24th. Matter adjourned to August 24th, 2021 at 9:30 a.m. And that was it. And then it has a list of all the exhibits that was given, but they don't tell you what the exhibits are. They did that throughout the testimony. In this list, it is just basically the numbers that she mentioned during the questioning of the witness. And there are like 3 pages of exhibits. So, as I stated at the beginning, it is my understanding that any issuance of transcripts is currently on hold. I don't know how long that hold is going to last. But if they do lift the hold, then, hopefully we can start by trying to request the transcripts and get more information. So, Ariel is out of control, okay? And I don't know what happened in her last day and a half of testimony. I've been seeing a lot of things on Twitter, but don't know if they're true or not. But hopefully we can get a hold of these transcripts and find out what actually happened in court. So that's it for me. Go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.